Hello, Telvanni here. And a few days ago, I was messing around in Crimson Temple, and I actually had 2 Apothecary cards drop from one encounter. So I figured I should probably do a proper test of the strategy I was running at the time and see how it performs on paper. I am honestly expecting this strategy to perform rather poorly compared to something like an Essence Rushing Alkan Go or a Juiced Legion strategy. But hey, that's why we perform map science and testing, right? So for today's test, I will be running 40 Crimson Temples, in the hopes of dropping another Apothecary card. However, I am honestly more interested in seeing how this strategy will perform without big ticket drops like an Apothecary. Alright, so for our Scarabs, we will be running Polished Divination, and this will hopefully give us more good cards like the Enlightened, Dragon's Heart, Apothecary, and 7 Years Bad Luck. Next, we will be using Polished Ambush Scarabs, adding 4 strongboxes to all of our maps. For our third Scarab, we will be running Polished Elder Scarabs, as these are basically a staple in the current environment due to the raw number of monsters and rares these things add to your maps. Finally, we will be running Polished Cartography Scarabs, and honestly, this is just to make it easier to sustain our map pool. If you'd rather buy bulk maps instead of bulk Scarabs, you could replace this with a Sacrificial Fragment or something. Moving on, for our first 2 Sextants, we will be running Corrupted Strongboxes and Enraged Strongboxes. Between these 2 compasses, we will be adding 3 additional Strongboxes to our maps, as well as forcing all of the Strongboxes in our maps to be rare quality, and to give us 500% increased item quantity from monster drops spawned by our Strongboxes. This will synergize incredibly well with our Ambush Scarabs, as well as our Keurig Ambush Craft. For our remaining 2 Sextants, we will be running my bread and butter, Elevated Essences and Elevated Shrines. These are both incredibly cheap to run, with Essences adding a lot of value to our maps, and Shrines adding a lot of quality to life when paired with the Gull, as well as adding quite a few extra monsters. Additionally, I'm going to be running the covetous Shrine nodes on the Atlas tree, so the added Shrines from this Sextant could potentially be quite lucrative. Speaking of which, let's take a look at our Atlas tree right now. We've got our traditional Essence, Strongbox, and Map Sustain nodes, as well as a lot of blockers. I've opted to start running Harvest again, with the increased price of Life Force as the league is progressing, and we're actually taking quite a few interesting things here. Trial of Glory could give us an opportunity at a Gift of the Goddess, which are like 200 chaos right now, so this is probably worth picking up. And Escaped Experiment over here gives us a chance at a Wild Rogue Metamorph to appear in our maps, which is just free catalysts. Since we are going to be leaning heavily into Strongboxes and Shrines, we're going to be taking all of those nodes on the tree as well, including these rarely taken nodes up here. If we were to be very lucky, we could end up duplicating something like an Apothecary, a Divine Orb, or even a Mirror. Next, let's take a look at our expenses. I am valuing our 40 raw maps at 5 chaos each for a total of 200 chaos. I spent around another 40 chaos on top of that, chiseling and rolling the maps to have non-toxic modifiers. We then spent around 8 chaos per Ambush Scarab, 4 chaos per Divination Scarab, 2 chaos per Elder Scarab, and 2.5 chaos per Cartography Scarab. For our Sextants, we spent 110 chaos on Elevated Gloom Shrine Sextants. And these are honestly completely unnecessary. I just like them for the guaranteed pops. However, if you wanted to save some money, I'd recommend running Elevated Resonating Shrines instead, as they're about half the price. Moving on, we spent about 1.5 chaos per map on Elevated Essence Sextants, and these are guaranteed money at the moment. Corrupted Strongbox Sextants were around 1.8 chaos per map, but the big expense here were the Enraged Strongboxes, at around 16 chaos per map. However, these Sextants will apply to all 11 Strongboxes in our maps, so hopefully it'll be worth it. All of this brings our total expenses for this test to 1,953 chaos, or around 11.3 divines at the current exchange rates. This is a pretty massive investment of nearly 50 chaos per map, and again, I think we're going to be hard-pressed to make all of our money back running these maps. But as usual, I'm recording this portion of the video before actually running the test, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. I'm going to get to work blasting these maps, and I'll see you on the flip side. Alright, I am back and I wanted to mention a few things. First off, I wasn't running any magic find for this test. If you can fit it in, I definitely recommend it, because 50% more of 0.001 loot drops is still going to be a relative improvement. Next, these maps were actually relatively fun to run, as they only took 3 to 4 minutes each on average. But this is a Wrath of the Cosmos altar farming strategy, so if you're planning to try this out for yourself, you'll have to be prepared to die a lot. The most depressing thing happened because of this actually. I finished basically the entire map and had around 6 or 7 Wrath of the Cosmos stacks, and I stumbled across an essence monster that I hadn't seen. It was one of the last 3 monsters in the map, and naturally, it was one of the Pantheon-touched monsters. And I bricked my map trying to kill it. So that experience made an already shitty loot pinata system even shittier. Thank you, GGG. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the loot I did manage to pick up. Here you can see the Harvest Life Force we managed to grab. I prioritized yellow and purple over blue, as blue is the least valuable of the 3 types at the moment. Next we have our Delirium tab, which is very sad looking, I'll admit. However, we had literally 0 Atlas points spec'd into Delirium, so this is kind of to be expected. Moving on, we've got our first big tab, Essences. I've gone ahead and upgraded all of our essences to Deafening, and all of the remaining essences have been excluded from our calculations. Next up, we've got our Scarabs tab. This performed fairly well compared to previous tests this league, mostly due to the fact that we had so many strongboxes in our maps. This meant we ended up seeing a fair number of operative strongboxes along the way. Here we have our Eldritch currency. We had mostly Grand Embers drop, thanks to the Wrath of the Cosmos, and we even lucked out on a couple of Eldritch Exalts. Next, we've got our Heist tab, and we actually got fairly unlucky this time around, with 0 good blueprints dropping, and only 3 deception contracts. But again, we had 0 points spec'd into Heist on the Atlas tree, and all of this was basically no effort. Finally, we have our General Loot tab. This has the bulk of what we are including in our test. We dropped 88 Crimson Temple maps during this 40 map test, and 44 Park maps. I've gone ahead and calculated the value of Crimson Temples at 4.5 chaos each, and the Park maps at 2.5 chaos each. Continuing on, you can see all of the currency drops we had. Up here, we've got our invitations that dropped, and we actually had 2 incandescent invitations drop, which are the expensive ones. However, that just happened because of how the testing lined up, and since you're only going to see 2 of those drop every 56 maps, rather than 40, I've gone ahead and excluded the second one from our profits. Coming down here, we got 1 Atlas memory worth about 10 chaos. Next, we saw 2 improved trials while mapping. One was a dedication worth around 15 chaos, and the other was luckily a Gift of the Goddess worth around 1 divine. As far as I know, these are evenly weighted, so you could expect on average to see 1 Gift of the Goddess per 3 improved trials ran. Moving on, we managed to complete 3 mirrored tablets during this test. One was just your run-of-the-mill tablet, but the other 2 were actually very good. We managed to get a tier 10 Reflection of Paradise, which is worth about half a divine. However, we got an even better tablet here, with a tier 15 Reflection of Kalandra, and this thing is worth about 6 divines right now. However, as I don't expect most players to get this lucky with their tablets, I've gone ahead and factored the price of each tablet at only 20 chaos, as I believe players who know how to construct their lakes should at minimum be able to receive 20 chaos on average per tablet they complete. Next up, we had a total of 4 valuable divination cards dropped during this test. Unfortunately, no, we did not receive an Apothecary card this time around. However, we did have 2 Enlightenments drop and 2 7 Years Bad Luck drop, both of which were duplicated either via our Strongbox passives or Eldritch Altars. Moving on, we had 6 high-tier currency drops during this test. 1 Annulment, 2 Exalts, and 3 Divine Orbs. I think we got fairly lucky as 2 of the Divine Orbs were duplicated from a Strongbox, and since all of these currencies have the same weighting, you'd probably only expect to see 2 Divines here where we saw 3. Moving on, let's take a look at our excluded loot very quickly. I don't want to inflate our profits by including junk that you're not realistically going to be able to sell easily. Thus, we have excluded a lot of the bad contracts, unique items, garbage divination cards, and as mentioned, any non-deafening essences. We actually have about 50 chaos worth of essence here, but I personally would not sell them in their current state. Finally, as mentioned earlier, we are excluding one of the 2 incandescent invitations that we had drop, and we are also excluding the Aegis Aurora and Enhanced gem that dropped. I was very excited to find out that Aegis Aurora is actually like 15 divines this league, but there is no way that you could expect, on average, to find one of these every 40 maps, so we have excluded it. Alright, so now that we've taken a look at all of the loot we had drop in-game, let's go ahead and take a look at our spreadsheet to see how we did. We had over 2,000 chaos worth of general loot, 1,500 of which was raw currency drops. The rest was things like our divination cards and improved offerings. We had 165 chaos and harvest life force, only 23 chaos of delirium items, 323 chaos worth of deafening and corrupted essences, 282 chaos worth of scarabs, 506 chaos worth of maps, 120 chaos came from invitations, and only 64 chaos and heist related drops. We also had 238 chaos from Eldritch currency, and finally we had 3 mirrored tablets, which I've again valued at 20 chaos each. This brings our total revenue for this test to around 22.5 divines worth of loot. So factoring out our expenses of 11.35 divines, we are left with a total profit of 11.1 divines, or around 50 chaos profit per map. While focused, these maps were taking me 3 to 4 minutes on average to complete. So a player who is actively playing the game with a build similar to mine could probably expect to see around 4.5 divines an hour while running this strategy. However, this is probably near the lower end of things, as that number does not factor in big drops that are bound to happen over hundreds of maps, such as the Aegis Aurora that dropped during this test, or the 2 Apothecary cards that inspired me to run this test. And as mentioned earlier, I also bricked the only Pantheon-touched monster that I encountered during this test. Moving on, let's very quickly take a look at how a few of our mechanics fared. We made around 4 chaos per map running Harvest, which again leads me to believe even with the higher prices of Life Force, it might be better to drop those nodes on the tree and pick up something else. Maybe more quantity in the middle of the tree, or potentially add something like Harbinger or Abyss to our maps instead. Next up, was essences worth running? Is that really even a question at this point? Yes, essences are worth running if your build can handle them, as they add about 7 chaos per map for very little effort, as well as adding guaranteed rares to our maps that could potentially be Pantheon touched. Finally, we ran Cartography Scarabs again in this test, and again, unsurprisingly, it added very little value to our maps, to the point where it is probably better just to run a Sacrificial Fragment, or if you decide to drop Harvest, you could use this slot to grab another Scarab like Harbinger or Abyss. Alright, so would I recommend running this strategy? I think I would, honestly. The maps felt pretty quick and easy, as there really wasn't that much juice. Apart from the strong boxes, which are relatively easy for most builds. The profits per hour weren't the absolute highest, but they're still reasonable in the current loot drought. And if you manage to pull an Apothecary, you'll definitely be glad that you ran this setup. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to the channel, as it does help me out considerably. And these map science videos take quite a long time to put together for you guys. Anyway, thank you for watching, good luck with your league, and I'll see you in the next one.